Leonardo da Vinci's prediction for flying machines. If you lived in the 1400s and wanted to get somewhere fast, your best option was a horse. Now, in the middle of that world, a man named Leonardo da Vinci was convinced that there was a possibility humans could fly like birds, and started sketching machines that looked like giant mechanical birds. Yep. Centuries before the Wright brothers ever took flight at Kitty Hawk, Leonardo was out here predicting airplanes. You see, Leonardo studied birds obsessively. He watched how their wings flapped, how they caught the wind, and basically tried to figure out how humans could do this too. So in the late 15th century, he designed contraptions like the ornithopter, which had wings that flapped just like a bird's. Of course, his machines never actually flew because the materials were too heavy and the science of aerodynamics wasn't there yet. But the basic principles he drew, lift, thrust, drag, were exactly the same ideas modern aviation uses today. Now fast forward about 400 years and humans finally did what Leonardo dreamed. We have planes, helicopters, and even space travel. Mother Shipton and the London Plague. There were no internet or phones in the 16th century, so the only form of entertainment was gossip, rumors, and the occasional so-called prophet. One of the most famous was a strange woman called Mother Shipton. She was allegedly said to have been born in a cave and grew up with a gift for predicting the future. And in one of her prophecies, she spoke about a deadly plague. She warned that London would one day be struck by disease so terrible that houses would stand empty and carts would carry away the dead. And then, in 1665, 100 years after her death, the Great Plague of London hit. This plague wiped out almost 100,000 people in less than 2 years. Whole families vanished, businesses shut down, and plague carts actually rolled through the streets collecting bodies, just like Mother Shipton had described. Now, many people think it was a coincidence since plagues weren't rare in Europe back then. But what makes this prophecy a little believable is the details she described. Nostradamus' prediction of World War II and Hitler. In 1555, a French astrologer named Nostradamus published a book filled with strange four-line poems called quatrains. The most famous prediction was the one about World War II and Adolf Hitler. Basically, Nostradamus wrote that, from the depths of Western Europe, a child will be born of poor people. He will seduce a great troop with his tongue. His fame will spread toward the realm of the East. Fierce beasts will cross the rivers. To put this simply, Hitler was born in Austria in Western Europe to a poor family. He rose to power not through wealth or royalty, but by using his words. His speeches hypnotized and controlled millions, and his fame and power extended into the East as Germany invaded countries like Poland and the Soviet Union. And the fierce beasts crossing the rivers could be seen as the armies of tanks and soldiers storming across Europe during the war. This prophecy closely matches Hitler's story, even though Nostradamus wrote it almost 400 years earlier. Of course, critics argue that his words are vague and people just added extra meanings to them, but the truth remains that these events did happen. Morgan Robertson's Titanic prediction. In 1898, a writer named Morgan Robertson published a short novel called Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. At first, it was just a work of fiction, but years later, people were shocked by how much it seemed to predict the real-life disaster of the Titanic. Robertson's story described the world's largest ship called the Titan. It was built to be unsinkable, designed with luxury in mind, and carried only a fraction of the lifeboats needed. Sound familiar? 14 years later, in 1912, the Titanic set sail and history recreated his story. In the novel, the Titan hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic on an April night traveling at high speed.
Okay, let's go.
Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
It sinks, and thousands of passengers die because there aren't enough lifeboats. Now, when the Titanic went down in April of 1912, almost the exact same thing happened. It started sinking after striking an iceberg in the North Atlantic, and many people died because there weren't enough lifeboats. The similarities are almost eerie because it turned out that both ships were even about the same size. The Titan was 800 feet, while the Titanic 882. Both also carried around 3,000 people and were described as the greatest ships of their time. People called Robertson a prophet, though he claimed he wasn't predicting the future. He said he simply studied ships of his time and imagined what could go wrong. Edgar Cayce prediction of the Great Depression. Often called the Sleeping Prophet, Edgar Cayce was a man from Kentucky who claimed he could put himself into a trance and give readings about health, the future, and even world events. He was obviously dismissed as just another fortune teller until one of his strangest predictions came true. In the early 1920s, when America was booming, Cayce warned that the good times wouldn't last. Even though nothing indicated so. I mean, the factories were buzzing, Wall Street was climbing, and the economy just kept growing. But according to Cayce, those banks and businesses were built on shaky money practices and would collapse. He even warned that greed and risky bets people were making on the stock market would lead to a horrible disaster. When he said this, no one believed him, but then in 1929, it happened. The stock market collapsed, banks failed, and the world entered the Great Depression. Millions lost jobs, homes, and savings, which was exactly the kind of suffering Cayce had warned about. Till date, skeptics still argue on whether he was lucky or actually gifted, but his warning about the Great Depression remains eerily accurate. H.G. Wells' atomic bomb prediction. In 1914, before World War I even began, the writer H.G. Wells made a prediction that almost sounded impossible. In his book, The World Set Free, he described a terrifying new kind of weapon and called it the atomic bomb. Now, keep in mind, this was decades before scientists actually discovered how to split an atom. In fact, nuclear physics was barely understood, and the idea of using it to make a weapon seemed like pure science fiction. But Wells imagined bombs powered not by gunpowder or TNT, but by the very building blocks of matter itself. He wrote that these weapons would release massive energy, cause destruction on a scale the world had never seen, and even change the way wars were fought. Years later, in 1939, scientists finally unlocked nuclear fission, and by 1945, the United States dropped real atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands and actually changed humanity forever. What makes Wells' prediction so unbelievable is how close he got to the truth. He not only guessed the science, but also the social impact. He said atomic bombs would push the world toward global cooperation, something that later showed up in talks about arm controls and the United Nations. Baba Vanga and Obama's presidency. Baba Vanga was a blind Bulgarian woman who many people believe had the gift of seeing the future. Back in the 1980s, when the Cold War was still going on and America had only ever elected white male presidents, she supposedly made a shocking prophecy. She said, "The 44th president of the United States will be an African-American man, and he will be the last U.S. president." And when you know it, in 2008, against all odds, Barack Obama won the election and became the 44th president of the United States, the very first black man to ever hold that office. This made people immediately think back to Baba Vanga's words. How could a woman in a small village in Bulgaria have predicted something so specific decades earlier? Of course, the part about Obama being the last president didn't exactly come true. After him, we got Trump, Biden, and now Trump again, so obviously the politics keep moving forward. Kind of. But many believers argue that maybe she meant the presidency as we knew it would change forever after Obama. Because, if we're being honest, his time in office did shake up politics, culture, and history in ways no one could have imagined before. Ryo Tatsuki's prophecy of Freddie Mercury's death. In 1976, a young Japanese woman named Ryo Tatsuki had a series of strange, vivid dreams. These dreams were so powerful that she wrote them all down in a book called The Future I Saw. What makes this book so shocking is that many of her dreams later came true, but one of the most unbelievable was about Freddie Mercury, the lead singer of Queen. In her dream, she saw a vision of a man with the initials FM. She wrote that this man was a famous singer who would die from a mysterious new illness that attacked the body and spread worldwide. At the time in 1976, nobody had ever heard of AIDS. It didn't even exist in medical records yet, so to predict such a disease years before it became known sounds almost impossible. But in 1991, Freddie Mercury tragically died from complications due to AIDS. The prophecy lined up so well because the initials, the fame, and the illness that was unknown in the 70s but later shook the entire world. What makes this prophecy so unbelievable is that Rio wrote about a global disease before the world even knew it existed. Rio Tatsuki's prophecy of the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. Back in Japan, that same woman, Rio Tatsuki, became famous for something almost unbelievable. She drew comics in the 1990s that seemed to predict the massive 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. In 1999, she published a manga called Our Future, where she described visions she had had about disasters that might hit Japan. One of the most shocking parts was her prediction of a huge earthquake and tsunami around 2011. She even wrote that it would be centered in the Tohoku region. Her manga even showed the ground splitting apart, entire towns swallowed by waves, and survivors left shocked and displaced. At the time, people thought it was just creative imagination. But then, on March 11, 2011, Japan was hit by a 9.0 earthquake, the fourth largest ever recorded in modern history. Minutes later, a tsunami followed and surged through the Tohoku coastline and killed nearly 20,000 people. It was even the cause of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, which left thousands of people homeless. Readers of her manga were stunned because what she had drawn years before looked very similar to everything that happened. This wasn't her only prediction. She also describes strange changes in animal behavior, unusual weather patterns, and even how people might prepare for future disasters. Many of these details matched real events, which made people start calling her a modern-day prophet.